Today I want to talk about something that I haven't nailed down yet. How I conduct my job is that I kind of dig into scriptures and I look at the contextual intent of verses, and then I listen to other theologians throughout the week that I trust, and then I focus on applying these pieces of ancient wisdom and these pieces of wisdom from these speakers, and then I unpack what I've learned about myself to you all with the hope that it may resonate with you in some way, shape, or form. That's kind of how I roll. That's not how a lot of theologians roll, but that's how I do it. So in a way, I'm kind of like a student in this whole crazy thing that we call life, speaking in front of other students of life and just bringing information humbly before you that has made me grow or stumble throughout the course of my week. And today I want to talk about something that I've been struggling with far longer than a week or so. I want to talk about finding peace in the midst of chaos. Now, I'm clinically diagnosed with OCD. Like clinically, I got a doctor's note. It's legit. And I've been diagnosed with social anxiety disorder. So when I come up to you awkwardly, if it's your first Sunday, it's not you, it's totally me. And when the conversation feels forced, again, it's not you, it's me. Because on the inside, I'm like, I'm just screaming on the inside. But these disorders that I have also present themselves occasionally as general anxiety disorders. So finding peace in chaos is a little bit difficult for me. So this basically means that I plan things out to a fault, and then when things go off the rails, which they often do, or things stray just a little from the plan that I had, I begin to freak out. Let me give you an example. I wasn't even planning on sharing this today because it just happened today. We got up this morning and we went to go crank up the church van, which has all our sound equipment in it. Granted, it's like, 5:45 when we're getting in the van at some point. So I'm getting ready to go. I'm like, all right, I'm early. This is going to be awesome. We'll have plenty of time to set up and get coffee on the way. And then I turn the key in my ignition and nothing. The van battery was dead. Now, typically that wouldn't be that bad of a situation, but I live in the Ben Lomond Mountains, which means where I park this van is a single space, and you actually have to go down the side of this cliff to park there. So there's no way to get another car in to charge the battery. So I would like to express my gratitude for my new wife being alive today, because what she did was she drove over the cliff, and she had one tire in the air, and she was like inverted above the car just so we could charge the van to get here, because otherwise we wouldn't have had any screens and things would have just been a mess. But that's what I'm talking about. Like, who expects that to happen? You know what I'm saying? So, yeah, she knows me well enough to know that I don't deal with stress so well. And I think me not dealing with stress so well stems from this internal judgment that I have that kind of compartmentalizes things in my mind as good or bad, right or wrong, perfect or flawed, sacred and evil. Are you with me? And many people do this, especially Christians. When things are good, most Christians tend to think that God is with me in that moment. God is blessing me. God has ordained this project that I'm doing. But when things go poorly, we have a tendency to think that the forces of evil are mounting against us. You know, the devil's at my doorstep kind of thing. And that's how I functioned as a Christian for a long time. I was raised evangelical. When things were going wrong, I'd blame it on Satan. But I think that's a very poor understanding of how life functions. And I think this poor understanding is rooted in poor theology of what scriptural metaphor is trying to teach us. So I believe that we have this inability, and I think it's getting worse every year. We have this inability to see things as majestic and holy when they go off the rails. Fundamentalist Christians and atheists both have this problem. I call them fundamentalist atheists. Not all atheists, but you've got fundamentalist Christians and you have fundamentalist atheists. Believe me, I'm not. And I would much rather hang out with atheists all day. But Christians consider things like the Bible and hymns and temples, they consider these things sacred. And these are the places and the words in which God or God's presence resides. But then fundamentalist atheists that rely on science alone, they tend to look at equations and theories to explain the meaning of life, but oftentimes, not all of them do this, but oftentimes, many of these fundamentalist atheists lose their sense of wonder about the universe that we live in because it can all be explained. And the scriptures teach us that to find peace and the meaning of life, it lies somewhere in the middle of these two positions. The text teaches us that the entirety of the universe is ineffable. It's amazing. It's incomparable. All of it is wondrous. And if you are of the scientific community and you like to learn new things, but it's really hard to impress you, let me help you out. Did you know that there's a star called a neutron star? And it can fit comfortably inside of a teaspoon, but it weighs 10 million megatons. This thing can fit inside a teaspoon, but it weighs 10 million megatons. It doesn't make sense, but it's amazing. Does anybody know what an aphid is? Do we have any gardeners in here? Aphids? So sometimes they're annoying for people, but did you know that they don't actually reproduce? They just clone themselves over and over again? Did you know that each suction pad on an octopus gives it the ability to taste, smell, and feel whatever it touches, and that 5/7 of its entire neurosystems is located in its tentacles, meaning that functionally, each arm of an octopus literally has a mind of its own. Did you know that some turtles can breathe out of their butts? That's my favorite. Did you know that if your DNA was the size of a fishing line, it could be stretched from the earth to the moon and back 7 times over? Did you know that a baleen whale, a blue whale, that their throat is no bigger than a tangerine? That huge whale has a throat that could not even swallow my fist. Did you know that subatomic particles called mesons can be split into 2 pieces and moved to different sides of the earth? And if a scientist were to reverse the electrons on 1/2 of this meson in another part of the world, then simultaneously the electrons on the other half of the meson would reverse, even though they're not physically connected. If your jaw hit the floor at any point in this sermon, or if you were just amazed at this information, that is the sense of wonder that we're intended to have throughout the span of our lifetime, even though we often forget to. The ancient Hebrew understanding of life is exactly that everything is spiritual. In fact, they believe that our spirit is actually synonymous with our breath. In ancient Hebrew, the word for breath is ruah, and it's also the same word for spirit. Breath, spirit. You can't separate the two. And when the New Testament was written, that idea carried forward. In the New Testament, the same word for breath and spirit is pneuma. Same word. You can't separate the two. Some people say they're not very spiritual people, but if you're breathing, it's too late. You're already spiritual. All of life is sacred. The good, the bad, the romantic, the heartbreak, the painful, the exotic, the erotic, the chaotic, and the peaceful. It all comes together to form this beautiful, messy mosaic that has been painted with the various degrees of color from the spectrum in the human experience. All of it is beautiful, including the chaotic. There's a story in the book of Exodus about Moses that highlights this point. In the opening of the story, Moses tells God that he desires to see God's face. That's all Moses wants to do, is see God's face. And the scripture says this. This is God talking, by the way. I don't think I have this one up here. That's another verse. It says this. It says, "See, there is a place by me where you shall stand on the rock. And while my glory passes by, I will put you in a cleft of the rock, and I will cover your face with my hand until after I have passed by. Then I will take away my hand from you, Moses, and you shall see my back, but my face shall not be seen. Now, the term here for back means where someone's presence previously was. And we've all experienced what this scripture is actually trying to say to some degree. Have you ever been working in your house, like cleaning a room, or have you ever been painting a wall, or maybe fixing some plumbing under the sink, and you're having a conversation with your kids, or your partner, or your spouse, and you were talking, and then a few minutes later you start talking as if they were still there, but then when you look, when they don't respond, it turns out that they left the room, and you probably been talking to yourself like a crazy person for like 5 minutes. You ever had that happen to you? Happens to me every Sunday morning. I'll be like talking to Chris, and I'm like, hey, could you go get the, and you're not here. Happens all the time. That is the Hebrew description for what God's back is in this text. And the verse continues. God says, be ready in the morning and come up in the morning to the mountain and present yourself on the mountain there to me, on top of the mountain. I want to read that again because I know it sounds weird. Be ready in the morning and come up in the morning to the mountain and present yourself on the mountain, on top of the mountain. Now, God is not a God of redundancy in the Old Testament. There's a reason why he's saying this. In Hebrew, what the sentence is trying to say is, go to the top of the mountain, Moses, and let your mind be at the top of the mountain. Now, why is that important? After you spend a whole day climbing a mountain and you finally reach the top, what's the first thing you're going to think of after you take in the scenery of being at the top of the mountain? What's the first thing that's going to come to your mind? Say it again. How do I get down? So what God is saying is go to the top of the mountain and just be there. Don't think about how to get back down. Don't think about all the problems you have with these whiny folks that you brought out of slavery. Don't think about any of that. Just go to the top of the mountain and be at the top of the mountain. God was telling Moses to not let your mind wander. Try to be at peace. And then the story continues. God says, no one shall come up with you, and do not let anyone be seen throughout all of the mountainside. Do not let your flocks or herds graze in front of that mountain. So Moses cut 2 tablets of stone, and he rose early in the morning, and he went up the mountain as the Lord had commanded him. And the Lord descended while Moses' face was covered in the cloud, and stood with him there and proclaimed the name of the Lord. And the Lord passed before Moses and proclaimed, the Lord, a God merciful and gracious, slow to anger, and abounding in steadfast love and faithfulness, is here. The Lord who keeps steadfast love for the 1,000th generation, forgiving iniquity and transgression and sin. Now at this time, Moses is hiding his face on top of the mountain. Remember, he can't see God's face because he's worried that he'll die. And he opens his eyes to see God's back. I'm going to ask you this, and I hope that I communicated this story clearly enough that you know where I'm going with this. When God removes his hand from Moses' face, where is Moses located when this happens? Where is he at? He's on top of a mountain. So he doesn't physically see God, but what does he see? He sees where God has been, where God's presence was. He sees scenery. He sees the entire landscape unfold before him. God is telling Moses that my presence is everywhere. The hills, the valley, the earth, the water, the light, and the dark. It's like this Mufasa moment with Moses. God is like everything the light touches. You know? And Moses is like, well, what about that dark space over there? That's the Department of Motor Vehicles. You will never want to go there. So catch that symbolism. All of creation, the entirety of life, is sacred. God's presence is all around you, no matter what circumstance you're going through. And sometimes we just have to remember that, and we have to look what's beyond us right now in this moment and remember that God is everywhere. Everything is sacred. And that's difficult. But believe me, you can find meaning and beauty no matter what you're going through, no matter what you've been through. If you can just take a step back and take a macro look at your life and life itself and the world around you. I can give you some personal examples. Okay, I felt the pain of divorce. And I drudged through dating at 30-something years old like I was visiting the proctologist every Friday night, okay? But if I didn't go through that, it was horrible. I wouldn't have met Allie. I lost my father figure to cancer, but for 15 years, I knew what it was like to have a positive role model in my life. And I knew what it was like to be unconditionally loved. My ex-wife, our first kid together, she had a miscarriage after 6 months. I don't think I've ever cried that much in my life. I stayed up for weeks on end. I didn't sleep. I was devastated. But now, I have 3 beautiful children that I'm privileged to have in my life. We were in Mexico last week. We've been saving up for a whole year. And we woke up to the news from our pet sitter that the morning when she went to let the dogs out before she went to work, our smallest dog had woke up paralyzed. He can no longer move his back legs. Turns out we had him go to the vet, and we had him looked at, and he had undiagnosed arthritis in his spine. And it had gone untreated so long, we had no idea. But once it got bad enough, the swelling actually caused his spinal column to narrow, and he can no longer move his back legs. And we don't know what's going to happen with him. And for us, our dogs are like our kids. But for 8 years, he has been an amazing dog. He's wonderful with kids. He's our buddy. He's goofy. He makes us laugh. He's a well-behaved little guy. And we had the privilege of having him in our life when he was completely healthy. And we may have him for many years, or we may have to make a tough decision. But the point is, we were lucky to have that little guy in our life. We've had to say goodbye to so many church members that have moved away from Santa Cruz, either because they can't afford it or because they've gotten opportunities elsewhere. We had to say goodbye, I think, to 62 people so far since we've started this church. And now, we all got the news that Dr. Bird has to move. But we had Dr. Bird for a couple years, and she put in a lot of time here, and she's a great friend of this community. We were lucky to have her. And on top of that, we've constantly got new faces coming in. And I'm sure you're going to fit right in and join the community and be a part of this family that we're all privileged to be a part of. There was a song that we sang during the worship. It was the slowest song by far. It's a traditional hymn. And it was written by a gentleman that was in America. He was in Chicago at the time, and he sent his family back home to Europe. He was a Scottish Presbyterian, and he sent his family back ahead of him because he had business to wrap up still in America. And he had a wife and 4 kids, and on the way back to Europe, their ship collided with a Scottish merchant ship, I believe, and it sank. And his 4 daughters perished in that accident. So he received a wire from his wife saying, "I'm the only one left. I don't know what to do." So he was heartbroken. I think he was even suicidal at one point. But he felt like he was blessed to have those children in his life as long as he did. You can't control tragedy. You can't control the nature of our existence, but you can appreciate what positive things you've had. And that's what he decided to do. And when he was passing the point where the ship had sunk, he wrote that song, "It Is Well." When peace like a river attendeth my way, when sorrows like sea billows roll. But whatever my lot has taught me to say, it is well with my soul. A few weeks ago, we went to the Rio, and we heard one of my favorite authors and theologians preach. And he used this passage in the Old Testament that's amazing, that captures my point today perfectly. It's found in Isaiah chapter 6, verse 2. I've got this on the screen for you. It says this. It says, seraphim, which are angels with 6 wings in the Old Testament. Seraphim were in attendance above him, meaning God. This is a vision of heaven. Each had 6 wings. With 2 they covered their faces, and with 2 they covered their feet, and with 2 they flew. And one called to another and said, Holy, holy, holy is the Lord of hosts. The whole earth is filled with his glory. Now the word holy comes from the ancient Hebrew word kadosh. I want you to say that with me. Kadosh. Kadosh. Put it together. Kadosh. Say it with some feeling. Kadosh. Nice. And it means sacred, indescribable, ineffable, pure, and consecrated. And the Hebrew term for the whole earth is full of his glory comes from the phrase eretz mellow. Say that with me. Eretz mellow. Very good. And it means the entirety of life, from beginning to end. All you see, all you don't. Everything. This verse literally says in context that our entire life experience is wholly holy. Everything is spiritual. I think the meaning of life, at this point in my life, is seeing the divine within the moments we define as chaos, that we define as problematic, that we define as stressful, and we define as disorder. When in reality, if we could just take a step back and we examine our lives and we examine the amazing grandness of the universe, we can realize how sacred it all can be. So I'm here today to challenge you in the midst of your difficult circumstances to remind yourself how beautiful life is. Even in the midst of your struggles, remember to look forward or look back or look around for the good. Is that child of yours testing your patience? My friend back east says that he has a second child that tests his hood all the time. That child just tests my hood is what he says. Is that child testing your patience? Maybe it's time to take a step back and say, Kadosh, Kadosh, Kadosh. Is that sickness or disease that you've been struggling with your whole life, is it flaring up again? And you just don't feel like going through it again? Maybe it's time to take a deep breath and realize how privileged you are just to have breath in the first place and say, Kadosh, Kadosh, Kadosh. Has everything changed in your marriage and you're not sure how things are going to end? Kadosh, Kadosh, Kadosh. Have you lost someone close to you? Or are you losing someone close to you? Kadosh, Kadosh, Kadosh. Are there moments, and this is for us, I think, when you're taking to the streets and you're fighting for justice, and you are setting out once again to deal with this nation's corrupt leadership that seems to roll in every day on the news, and you just have this overwhelming sense of despair and hopelessness, and you ask yourself, is America totally lost to bigotry? Kadosh, Kadosh, Kadosh. Peace is not about finding a life that is devoid of difficulty and hardship. It's being able to step back and realize that hardship, pain, loss, sickness, disease, struggle are always going to be a part of our lives, but if we simply glance over the landscape of our lives, like Moses did on top of the mountain, we can embrace peace beyond our present circumstance, because everything is spiritual. Everything can have meaning if you look for it, and all things are holy. So may you move from this place embracing the struggle, the chaos, the toil, the difficulty, knowing that in the end there is meaning if we search for it and always remember to wholly embrace the holy. Grace and peace to you. So I hope that we will get to know you a little bit more at lunch. I understand if you have things to do, but I would love to see you and talk to you and answer questions about the church. Again, lunch is on me. So with that being said, I will say goodbye until next week. And may the peace of the Lord Christ go with you wherever it may send you. May it guide you through the wilderness and protect you through the storms. May it bring you home rejoicing at the wonders that it shows you. May it bring you home rejoicing once again into our doors. Grace and peace to every one of you.